Welcome to the WebMD Health Discovered podcast. I'm Dr. Neha Pathak, WebMD's Chief Physician Editor for Health and Lifestyle Medicine. Today, we're delving into an aspect of well-being that we are recognizing as incredibly crucial: social health. Nearly 1 in 4 people worldwide feels lonely, according to many recent surveys. And the World Health Organization, including the United States Surgeon General, has been calling attention to the negative effects of loneliness, even calling loneliness an epidemic. We're familiar with the importance of diet, physical activity, and sleep for physical and mental well being, but how profoundly do our social connections impact our health? What are the specific ways we can improve our social well being? And how can we model healthy social connection for our children? To walk us through this topic is author Caslee Killam. Caslee Killam is an internationally recognized expert in social health and author of The Art and Science of Connection: Why Social Health is the Missing Key to Living Longer, Healthier, and Happier. Killam's insights can be found in outlets such as the New York Times, Scientific American, Psychology Today, and the Washington Post. Welcome to the WebMD Health Discovered podcast, Caslee.
Thank you so much, Neha. It's great to be in conversation with you.
So I am very excited to jump into our conversation. But before we start exploring our topic, I'd love to learn more about your own personal health discovery, your aha moment around the importance of social connection.
So, one of my aha moments actually happened quite a while back when I was finishing up my undergraduate degree in psychology. And I decided to do kind of a personal experiment where I would do one act of kindness every single day for the whole semester. And I had a couple goals. One was that I really wanted to make connection a bigger priority in my life. And the other was that I wanted to put the science into practice. I'd been nerding out on the science of human connection for a while, and I really wanted to take those research insights and put them to use in my day to day. The acts of kindness varied quite a lot. Some days they were very simple, such as complimenting the grocery store clerk or writing a thank you card. Sometimes they were acts like helping a pregnant mother lift a stroller up some stairs. Or on one day, I actually recruited a friend and we held signs outside of the campus library that said, if you're feeling stressed about exams, have a free hug, and ended up hugging hundreds of strangers. And at the end of the experiment, I was absolutely blown away by the effect that it had on my life. I had made many new friends. I had deepened the relationships that I already had. I felt much more connected to my community. But then there were some more surprising results. So things like that semester, I actually achieved the highest GPA of my entire undergraduate degree, which seemed counterintuitive given I was spending so much time on acts of kindness and so little time studying. But also, I was healthier. It improved my mental health. I felt so much happier and more engaged. And the energy and motivation carried into my physical health. And so I was more motivated to cook healthy meals and exercise regularly. So I saw that, I didn't have the language for it at that time, but what I realize now is that I had strengthened my social muscles and really improved my social health. And it happened in such a meaningful and quite profound way. So now I am on a mission to help others do the same.
Well, I just want to thank you for that piloting of the research and then the research that you've done since then. So, as we dig into our conversation and think about a step by step approach to increasing social connection in our own lives, I'd love to start with sort of the converse of that. Can you talk a little bit about loneliness? So, we hear a lot about the epidemic of loneliness. What are some of the risks that come along with loneliness?
Yeah. Last year, the US Surgeon General declared that loneliness is a public health priority and truly an epidemic. So it's a very timely question. And the way I would think about it is that the health outcomes of isolation and loneliness, and on the converse of connection and community, fall under three main categories. So those categories are one, longevity, two, physical health, and 3, mental health and happiness. And so I can walk through some of the data on each of those. So, for example, starting with the first category, longevity. People with a strong sense of connection and community tend to live longer. And the flip side of that is that people who are isolated or lonely on a chronic basis tend to actually have a higher risk of mortality. So there's quite a bit of research on this. One study I really love took place actually in the 1970s, where researchers followed nearly 7,000 people for 9 years. And they found in that time frame that men who had fewer social and community ties were actually twice as likely to die, and women were closer to 3 times as likely to die if they had fewer social ties. And this was after controlling for other health behaviors like smoking, obesity, using preventive health care services. So we see in that study and in a lot of research since then that longevity is a really key outcome here. The second category is around physical health. So people who are isolated or lonely tend to show worse health outcomes. And in contrast, people with a strong sense of connection and community tend to be more physically healthy. So we see this in the way that our relationships help prevent us from getting sick in the first place. So, for example, people who have a strong sense of social support develop fewer cold symptoms when they're exposed to the cold virus. But then on the flip side, people who are isolated or lonely on a regular basis actually have a 29% increased risk of heart disease, as one example. So we're seeing very real outcomes here. The other way in which our physical health is affected is that our relationships help us heal faster if we are sick, right? So, for example, there was a study of adults who had type 2 diabetes, and those who had a strong sense of support from the different people in their life had lower blood glucose levels and also a lower mortality risk. So, again, we're seeing all these various physical health outcomes associated with our social lives. And then that third category is around mental health and happiness. So people who are isolated or lonely are at a stronger risk of developing depression. For example, there's actually causal evidence showing that people who are more lonely are more likely to have depressive symptoms 5 years later. And there's quite a bit of research on that depression outcome, but also things like dementia. So, chronically isolated or lonely older adults have a 49 to 60% higher risk of developing cognitive decline. And then, of course, there's this aspect of just happiness and joy and meaning, right? When we feel connected, that's a source of joy in our day to day lives that elevates our ability to thrive. So, in all these ways, we can see that there are true, strong health correlations and causations with isolation and loneliness, and conversely, with connection and community.
I'm wondering, what does the research show around having this very positive, socially connected life, but having less healthy food behaviors where you may not be making the best food choices, though it's really important with regard to being socially connected? You may potentially find that that reduces your ability to shift your diet in a more healthy way. How do you kind of dissect or think about that when it comes to healthy lifestyle?
The way I think about it is that our physical, mental, and social health are all interconnected and support each other. So, the example you gave of eating healthy, right? That is a very important health habit that we all need to maintain. You can see how our relationships might help support that. And so, these really go hand in hand. And when we strengthen our physical health, that helps our social health. When we strengthen our social health, that helps our mental and physical health, and so on. These are almost like pillars. So, one analogy I like to think of is that our overall health is a temple, and you can imagine different pillars or columns that support that temple. There's a physical column, there's a mental column, there's a social column. Others might say there's a spiritual column or an environmental column, for example. And all of these work in tandem to support our overall health and well being.
So, I just wanted to then have you describe the four strategies that you talk about to optimize social health from stretch, rest, tone, and flex. So, can you help describe what those strategies are and how we might be able to incorporate those in our lives?
There are a few strategies that I talk about in my book, The Art and Science of Connection. The analogy I like to give is that in the same way we strengthen and exercise our physical muscles, we can strengthen and exercise our social muscles. This takes into account two different aspects that we're trying to get at. We want to both optimize the quantity and the quality of the connection in our lives. So, stretching our social muscles means that perhaps the quantity of connection in your life is low. So, you're craving more friendships or more interaction overall. So, this is really about broadening the social interaction and connections that you can tap into. The second strategy is around resting your social muscles, right? Just like it's important to have rest days in your physical exercise, sometimes we need to take a rest in our social lives. So, this is about when your quantity of connection is really high, meaning you feel like you have enough relationships and communities that you're part of where you're getting enough interaction, or maybe you're getting too much and you actually feel a little stretched too thinly. And so, in that case, it's really about resting your social muscles. The third strategy is around toning your social muscles. So, this is the idea that if the quality of connection in your life feels unfulfilling, maybe you want to deepen your relationships, right? You want to get closer to people and go to that extra level of depth with them. And then finally, the fourth strategy is around flexing our social muscles. So if the quality of our connection feels really high and we actually feel fulfilled in our relationships and the communities that we're part of, then actually it's really about continuing to do what you're already doing and really flexing those social muscles, showing them off just like we would our physical muscles. And so by identifying which of these strategies feels right, at the given time in your life, then you can start to take steps to actually stretch, rest, tone, or flex your social muscles.
What is the importance of having like social connection within peer group? Or is it okay if the depth of your social connections are outside of your peer group?
One of the ways that I like to think about strong social health and optimal social health, what we should actually be striving for, is that it's really important to have diverse sources of connection. And there's a lot of research on this. So it's valuable, of course, to have a romantic partner, for example, who you spend time with every day. It's also valuable to have family relationships that you're close to, a peer group, like you mentioned, interactions with neighbors or positive relationships with some of your coworkers, communities and groups that you belong to, right? It's really about diversifying in the same way that you might a financial portfolio so that you have these different sources of support and of connection to fill up your bucket. And so, yes, absolutely, having connection with peer groups is important, but being able to rely on different kinds of people and different groups that you belong to is really important. And to your point, this can also evolve as we age, right? So, when you're a teenager, it's really important to have friends and to feel like you fit in at school, for example. That's something that we all recall from our high school years. And then as you get older, perhaps you get married and become a parent, and suddenly your family unit becomes that kind of primary source of connection in your day to day life. When someone retires, then they have to pivot again. They're no longer having that source of interaction from their coworkers on a daily basis. So you can see how these different moments in our lives and transitions can cause us to need different kinds of connection. But what I would advise people is that at any given stage, you don't want to over rely on any one source, right? So, an easy pitfall is to just spend all your time with your romantic partner and sort of let your friendships fall to the wayside. For example, you fall in love, you get married, you're so excited, and you end up spending less time with friends, right? That's a little bit of a risk. So, we want to make sure that we're constantly feeding into these different relationships and diversifying the sources of our connection.
What are some of the parameters or ways you advise people to think about ensuring that their social health is also optimized?
So, the first thing I would say is that in the same way that optimal physical health is different for each person, optimal social health is different for each person. So, for example, my healthy weight or the right number of calories that I need to consume in a given day might be very different from you or from someone else. And so that is also true with our social health. So, the aspect that I really like to emphasize is that It's about finding the right amount and type of connection for you personally, right? What's fulfilling? And in the book, I offer a lot of kind of reflection prompts to help us really think about systematically what are the relationships that mean a lot to me and that are fulfilling? How much interaction do I like on a day to day basis? So for me, I'm an introvert, which means I need less interaction. But when I do connect with friends or family or other people, I like it to be really meaningful, right? I love quality, deep conversations, one on one with friends, things like that. And so understanding our own kind of needs and preferences here is really important. That said, I think guidelines can be helpful in the same way that, 10,000 steps a day or 8 glasses of water, those kind of benchmarks can be useful for people. So, one that I like to recommend, I call the 5-3-1 guideline. And this is based on some national data that looked at what social habits actually are connected to well being, right? People who feel really happy and seem to be thriving, how much do they interact on a regular basis? So, the 5-3-1 guideline is that we should aim to connect with 5 different people each week, to maintain 3 close relationships overall, and to get 1 hour of quality interaction each day. So, again, this is a guideline, it's not a rule, but I think it can be a helpful kind of benchmark or guideline to anchor us in the choices that we're making. So, 5 different people per week could mean you talk to one friend on the phone, or you go for dinner with another group of friends, or you help out a neighbor in your community, things like that. So, having those different sources that you're interacting with each week. 3 close relationships is really about your core interactions and who are the people who are closest to you and most meaningful. And then that 1 hour of quality connection each day. Again, that might sound like a lot or not a lot at all, depending on each of our unique preferences and habits.
The one thing I haven't asked you about yet is something that purports itself to be very social, which is social media. How do you see that fitting in with social connection and optimizing your social health?
The way that I think about it, having read a lot of the research on this topic, which is very mixed, is that we need to really see social media and technology of any kind as a tool. People who feel connected in meaningful ways tend to use social media as a way to stay in touch in kind of easy, quick ways or to find new sources of connection. What they're not doing is scrolling mindlessly for hours on social media, falling into the trap of FOMO or comparison and things like that. People who do that really end up feeling lonely and more disconnected than before. So, the way we use social media and technology really matters. And importantly, the way that it's designed really matters. And so, there's also a call to action to people who are building these tools to think about optimizing them for meaningful connection, not just staying on as long as possible.
So, we've talked about some of the strategies that you have advised people think about to take stock of their social connection muscle. But do you have specific ways that people can get started if they're feeling disconnected or ways to optimize their social health?
So, one exercise that people can do if their strategy is to stretch, tone, or flex their social muscles is to do what you love with others. So, this is the idea that if you can find a way to do your hobbies or explore your interests with other people, that's going to allow you to make new connections, to go deeper with connections you already have, or to sustain the meaningful relationships that you already have. If you like hiking, find a local hiking group on Meetup, for example, or through your local community center. If you love arts and crafts, invite a friend to do a class with you at a local art studio. Really think about ways that you can do the things that you already enjoy with other people and center that interaction around a shared activity. Research shows that shared experiences is a really helpful way to make new relationships and also deepen relationships. And plus, it's fun. It takes some of the pressure off to have an activity that centers that interaction.
That's really a great way of thinking about it. So, I like to close all of my episodes with bite sized action items for people that are listening so that we can make sustainable change in our day to day lives. So, do you have any advice for someone who might be wanting to start today, who might feel disconnected? Where should they start? What can they do to optimize their social health?
I would say to start small. So, studies have shown that even brief weekly phone calls or even simple text messages can actually help people feel more connected. So, I would say start small, especially if you really feel overwhelmed or feel like you've been lonely for a long time. So, one way to do this is to choose one person and express gratitude to them. There's so much data showing that expressing gratitude and saying thank you helps deepen our relationships. It also helps us realize that we have so much positive connection in our lives. And this is the kind of thing that we all know we should do, but how often do we actually do it? And so, literally taking 1 minute to think of someone in your life and send them a text or send them an email or write them a card or give them a call, but just take one simple step to say thank you. And I think that can be a really simple way to sort of begin exercising our social muscles in a way that feels fulfilling. It's just a quick hit. Obviously, that's not going to completely solve isolation or loneliness, but it's one simple step that you can take right now to feel more connected.
Thank you so, so much. This has been such a great conversation. We've talked with Casley Killam about ways to optimize our social muscle and really ensure that we're optimizing our social health. To find out more information about Casley and to order her book, visit casleykillam.com or Instagram at casleykillam. We'll have information about how to connect in our show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. If you'd like to send me an email about topics you're interested in or questions for future guests, please send me a note at webmdpodcast@webmd.net. This is Dr. Neha Pathak for the WebMD Health Discover podcast.